Hi, and welcome to Take Every Thought Captive, our weekly look at the Catholic intellectual tradition and an exploration of the authors, books, and topics that have shaped Catholic thinking for 2,000 years. My name is Jason Gale, and I'm joined this week by Dr. Richard Bulzacchelli, our lecturer in theology here at Catholic Studies Academy. And today our topic is going to be looking at this abortion case, but also looking at abortion and some of the elements of fighting worldviews that we're experiencing today, and to really maybe take a look at this issue from a theological perspective and not just a judicial or legal perspective. But before we get started, I want to invite all our listeners, please help us out by sharing this content, hit the subscription notifications, hit all those things, and help us out to grow our community online. All right, Dr. Bulzacchelli, to get us started today, maybe you can kind of just give us a quick introduction to the case. I'm sure everybody, especially our Catholic listeners, are very well aware of what's going on. It's been all over the news and stuff, but just give us maybe a quick introduction to maybe the Dobbs case, and then we'll get into some of the fun theological aspects of it as well.
Sure. Well, so I've been sort of an amateur student of constitutional law since I was in college, and I took a constitutional law class. It was really great. And a lot of fun. And I always thought, of course, if I couldn't do this, if this theologian thing didn't work out, maybe I could become a Supreme Court justice. That would have been great. But of course, if you think the job market is tight in theology, try constitutional law.
Yeah, I bet.
But no, I don't have any actual legal qualifications, so I'm just going to speak. I'm just an amateur observer.
Sure.
Now, keep in mind that this podcast is being recorded while we're still looking at a leaked draft, and we don't know ultimately whether this is going to see the light of day for real, sure. Right? We don't know if this is going to be finally the majority opinion, or if it's going to be the same as it is right now, right? We don't know that, but let's just think about what's being said right now in this draft, what all the hubbub is about. Mm-hmm. So Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, right? Mm-hmm. So this has to do really with the Mississippi law, I believe, right?
Yeah.
In which a restriction is placed upon elective abortions. Right. So non-therapeutic abortions. I mean, as far as setting up the case, we don't even need to debate, whether therapeutic abortions are acceptable or not. But let's just, the right. Law is talking about non-therapeutic abortions, right? Restricting them after, I think the period is like 15 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting, right? Because most people would think, well, I mean, that's not a particularly draconian restriction on abortion. I mean, that's much more liberal as an abortion law than what you would have found in Mississippi prior to Roe v. Wade, for sure, right?
Yeah, or even some of the other ones that are being passed that are saying, if there's a heartbeat,
much tighter than that,
which
right?
is 8 weeks. Yeah.
So the this is what's really interesting about this case, is that the people who were arguing in favor of Jackson Women's Health Organization and therefore for abortion, were arguing that the court finds itself in a position where it has to make a choice between Roe v. Wade and Casey, those precedents, on the one hand, and this law, that the two aren't compatible at all. One either throws out the law, or one overturns the precedent. And it's interesting because, I mean, they're throwing the gauntlet down. They're not saying that. They're not arguing for a particular interpretation of Roe and Casey. They're recognizing that the whole thing is at stake in this controversy. Yeah. So that's kind of where the historical situation is, right? And guess what? The Supreme Court justices took that argument and they said,
Yeah.
you're right. It does come down to whether these precedents stand or fall, and they fall. And that's
Yeah.
that's ultimately what they say. Right. So the takeaway passage, right? Let me see if I can find it here. Oh yeah. So we hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. Oh, okay. Let me back up a little. It says, so it says, before us now is one such law. Okay, a sort of law to regulate abortion pre-viability.
Yeah.
The state of Mississippi asks us to uphold the constitutionality of a law that generally prohibits an abortion after the 15th week of pregnancy, several weeks before the point at which a fetus is now regarded as viable outside the womb. In defending this law, the state's primary argument is that we should reconsider and overrule Roe and Casey, and once again allow each state to regulate abortion as its citizens wish. On the other side, respondents and the Solicitor General ask us to reaffirm Roe and Casey, and they contend that the Mississippi law cannot stand if we do. Allowing Mississippi to prohibit abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy, they argue, quote, would be no different than overruling Casey and Roe entirely, unquote. They contend that, quote, no half measures, unquote, are available, and that we must either reaffirm or overrule Roe and Casey.
Wow. Yeah, the language here is very strong. Yeah.
Yeah, we hold that. So that's their argument, right? We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision, including the one on which the defenders of Roe and Casey now chiefly rely, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. That provision has been held to guarantee some rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution, but any such right must be, quote, deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition, and implicitly in the concept of ordered liberty. And that's from Washington versus Glucksberg, which was decided in 1997. All right, so that's kind of the salient passage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, I was gonna say that the one thing that I find interesting about this, like if you were to not know anything or read the case or know anything about the case and kind of, or even Roe v. Wade, just listening to the commentary, you would say, if the Supreme Court overrules Roe v. Wade and Casey, abortion is now illegal, and states get to do whatever they want, kind of a deal. Like, and then this is going to lead to all the other ridiculous things they've said. Like Joe Biden said, segregating LGBTQ kids, which I don't understand how that's connected to abortion.
Yeah, well, we could actually. That's interesting. With that, I think that's a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
For this decision, but I do kind of understand the logic behind it. We could talk about that a little bit, but
okay. But I think that's the interesting thing. So if the Supreme Court justices rule this way and Roe and Casey are overturned, it simply returns the authority to regulate abortion back to the states, saying that it's not a federally protected constitutional right. Right. So, I think that's the first thing is like, it's not saying that abortion is illegal. It's just saying abortion is not a federally constitutional right. So, the reaction to it seems a bit much on my part.
Well,
from my perspective,
but it's not that hard to understand, right? Because in this draft, right, the justices do point out that at the time of Roe, like 30 states had complete bans on abortion.
Yeah.
And that even now, after Roe v. Wade, because Roe v. Wade and Casey did not end the debate about abortion, a significant number of states have fairly stringent restrictions, right? And we
Sure.
actually know that what is it? I think it's 23 states, if I'm not mistaken, have trigger laws, right?
Yeah, those are
Essentially
interesting. Yeah.
By which, if you don't know what a trigger law is, I think I'm using the term correctly. I think I'm right about this. That basically they've passed laws. I know Tennessee is one of them. Texas is one of them. They've passed laws where, in the event that Roe v. Wade is overruled, then abortion would be banned in the state, period.
Yeah.
Right. So,
or they limit them. Yeah. Or they limit them severely if Roe v. Wade is overturned. There's, whatever law they put into place automatically goes into effect and stuff. Which is,
so for many of them, it's a heartbeat bill. Right.
Yeah.
And now the heartbeat thing is not, it's not exactly the same as sort of quickening, right? The quickening was an old standard, and they addressed that in this opinion. But it was a standard that actually, in not even very recent history, was already transcended, because it was just considered no longer scientifically sound, right?
Right.
But basically, the quickening idea, quickening means that the baby is the baby in the womb exhibits signs of life, right? And keep in mind that before you could look inside of people with sonograms or safely perform medical procedures and open people up and close them up again, there wasn't much you could really say about a baby in the womb.
Sure.
In terms of demonstrating that in fact the baby is alive, right? If you don't feel the baby moving, how do you really know that the baby is alive? You might know something's going on with you.
Sure.
But do you know, are you sure you're pregnant? Are you sure that you didn't get pregnant and lost the baby and you just have yet to formally miscarry, right?
Yeah.
We don't really know that stuff. So basically, under the law, quickening was seen as the point at which legal action became sort of justifiable, right? In other words, in many instances, not even all, it was just used as this line of demarcation. You can't punish somebody for killing someone you didn't know was alive, right? Or you know what I mean? If you can't demonstrate the person was alive before the action was taken, you can't successfully charge a person with having killed him. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
In order for me to have killed you, have
and
to
that
have
makes
been
sense.
alive and if we don't know that, then we can't say that I'm the guy who caused your death, right? You see what I mean? And that was basically the function of the quickening standard in the past. But quickening is a somewhat later than the heartbeat, right? But the problem is the heartbeat is fine because we could see it on a sonogram, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like and again, if we're gonna make political decisions based on science, right? If that's a thing like that, I'm just gonna use it that way, even though whatever. Based on science, right? Like science has advanced quite a bit since 1973. So it makes sense, if you have legislation and policies based on biology or based on science, right? It makes sense that at some point they do need to be updated, or at least re-examined and stuff. So because we can know a lot more, the differentiation of the sexes, right? We can know things like that very, very early on.
Some people might
And
disagree,
so
but
it all,
okay.
yeah. So it's, so there's, so there's this, so we're looking at it again. And, the other thing I find interesting about this, and maybe now we can get into kind of the culture war side of it, is,
Yeah.
the reaction to this is just, I don't want to just flat out say diabolical, but I mean, the reaction to this is just, it's visceral. It's, it would, the only thing I can think of, and maybe this isn't appropriate, I think Father John Harden would agree with this point. I mean, it would be like if somebody's attacking the Eucharist for us, we would get very defensive and we would defend it with our life, right? That's almost like what it seems like the reaction is when we're saying, no, you can't kill a baby. The reaction is, as if they were attacking the Eucharist or something like that.
Yeah.
So that, because of that reaction, I think for the Catholic, we have to say, okay, yes, this is about abortion. Yes, this is about states' rights, but there's something deeper here. There's something invisible. There's something that we can't particularly see, that would help that would lead those people to have such a visceral reaction to something that we would simply say, well, it's about states' rights. And it's no,
right.
You're attacking the sacrament of the godless,
Right.
in a way.
Well, that analogy, you're not making that analogy up. That analogy has been used by the pro-abortion people.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they've actually, you've heard their famous quotes, right? If what is it? If women could be priests, abortion would be a sacrament.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
even
when you look at the language, right? My body, right? Very similar to the words of institution.
I actually wrote one time. I wrote a poem like this, in which I'd have to find it now. I don't know where it is, but I tried to contrast the argument for abortion with the consecration, with the words of institution. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's very similar, and it, so for the Catholic, we have to look deeper and say, okay, well, what is behind this, that this reaction is now being expressed to us? What is there? And I think the best way to put it is that we're essentially dealing with two different cultures, and not just the culture of life and the culture of death, but even I think even more, because that's kind of, I think sometimes that just simply gets placed into moral terms where we're just simply talking about ethics. But I think the worldview that we're encountering here as Catholics encompasses much more than simply ethics.
Yeah, I agree with you. I still use the phrase culture of life and culture of death.
Yeah.
To describe that, because for me, and I've talked about this in many places, right? In papers I've written, in my book on the creation narrative, I talk about this at some length. That really what the culture of life versus the culture of death is really about is whether you think that the world is founded on an unbounded author of life who loves the world into existence on the one hand, right? And therefore you live in a world in which life is more powerful than death, in which love is more powerful than than any other force. Love is unlimited, right? Love is unlimited. Love is omnipotent. If God is love, right? I mean, love is omnipotent. And you live in that world in which there can always be more, because creative love lies at the heart of the world in which we live. Or on the other hand, you deny that, You deny that that's where the world comes from.
Hmm.
And ultimately, there's only so much of anything to go around. There's only so much life, only so much love, only so much you
Hmm.
to go around, right? You run out of everything.
Yeah.
And so, there's always this sort of, it's always a competition against my interests versus someone else's. That's always what it comes down to.
Yeah.
It's either me or the baby, right? That these are irreconcilable values.
Yeah, that's good. And I think again, for our listeners, you know, we're familiar with those terms: culture of life, culture of death. It's more than just a pro-life issue. It's an entire, like you said there, it's founded on that there is a God, right?
Yeah, and
Like
this is
that,
why, this is actually, when you think about it, this is the logic behind understanding, why the Catholic Church still holds procuring an abortion, procuring a direct abortion, right, or performing one,
Mhm.
um, as an excommunicable offense, late sententiae, right? The
Yeah.
very act of performing, the very
Yeah.
act of attempting to commit this thing
Mhm.
is itself a sign of your excommunication. You would never do this if you were Catholic, right? That's just not the Catholic frame of mind. That's not the
Yeah.
way Christians think. It's
Yeah.
incompatible with the faith, right? There just is no room in Catholicism for thinking that abortion is acceptable.
Right. Right. I think one of the other, or one of the elements of this different worldview we're encountering, and it's really starting to show its true face and everything, is kind of how, how does this worldview see history? How does this worldview kind of view the narrative with which we are living in now? Because the Christian, obviously, right, it's salvation history.
Yeah.
It's while we're a part of it, it's the story of God's love for the human race. It's the story of God's love made manifest in the person of Jesus Christ, right? Uh, you know, how would you characterize this, the narrative or the story of history for this culture of death?
Well, so I think that most of them, um, that's a good question. I don't know if there's a coherent view. I could name a
Yeah.
couple of competing views that may be at work. One, of
Hmm.
course, is the Marxist, essentially Marxist view, right?
Right.
That that history progresses through a kind of dialectic, right, of power,
Hmm.
and that power dialectic works itself out through a series of resolutions, right?
Hmm.
As a power is challenged by its antithesis, which rises up against it and limits it, a
Hmm.
new synthesis emerges, right? A new state of affairs arises, which
Hmm.
itself becomes its own kind of um, its own new power system, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The
Until
old has to
eventually
pass
all of this
away.
has to
Yeah.
break down, right? It all
Yeah.
evens out, and reaches us what might be described as a steady state
Yeah.
of a classless society, right? Absolute equal distribution of power,
Hmm.
and therefore no more struggles between people. And
Hmm.
I mean, obviously that's purely theoretical, right? But I think that's the view, right? And so, when you think about the many of the forces on the left,
Hmm.
they're obviously working in that direction, right?
Yeah.
Look at, for example, gender theory, which is bound up with this whole question of abortion in an interesting way,
Hmm.
right? Um, so you want to equalize what's perceived as a power imbalance between the sexes on account of biological sex or something like that,
Hmm.
right? And so, of course, to do this, it's believed that contraception and abortion are necessary. Why? Well, because you want to even out the seeming advantage that men possess in it's believed being able to engage in acts of sexual gratification without fearing consequences. Right. So you introduce contraception, preferably hormonal contraception, right? Something that the woman has control over. And that allows both men and women to engage in sexual activity with abandon. And that the sexual revolution is really all behind that, right?
Yeah.
And relationships of dependency no longer arise if there's no pregnancy as a result, right? If there are no children as a result of the sexual act. Whereas if pregnancy and childbirth arise as a result of the sexual act, then, like it or not, right, women find themselves in some sort of relationship of dependency upon the men in their lives, at least in a state of nature, right? Barring other kinds of technologies that allow women to reclaim some of their independence, even if they are pregnant and have children. It's clearly the case, right, that a pregnant woman over time becomes less and less mobile and more vulnerable. And particularly when the child is born, more and more of her time and energy are claimed by caring for that child in ways that are not directly paralleled in, for the men, right? I mean, it's not that men don't incur any sort of, this as well as I do. It's not that men don't incur any loss of self-determination or governance of our time or sleep, but obviously it's not the same for men as it is for women, right? And you would be foolish to think it is. So if that's a power dynamic, if we look at it through that lens, then obviously we're going to want to control that problem. We're going to see it as a problem. And the solution to it is contraception and ultimately abortion.
Yeah. One thing I do want to point out to our listeners, especially, is that phrase you use about power dynamics and things like that. This gets that I'll just say, look for that structure. You can find that structure anywhere. It's a popular tactic from Marx and others, where, I remember even asking an English professor once about what is language. And they defined language in terms of power.
Yeah. So
when we're encountering this culture, understand that this is where they're coming from. That almost everything is, again, this is the problem. Are there elements of power within language? Yeah, that's very true. But would you reduce language? Would you first define language or anything else like that? Or even like when you're talking about a baby there or something like that, would you boil it down to, or begin with defining it in terms of power?
Well,
like to the Christian, that seems so foreign. Right. Yeah.
You wouldn't, and I wouldn't. But if you're within the culture of death, you would.
Yeah.
That's the mentality.
Yeah.
There's only so much to go around. Yeah. It's either you or me.
Yeah.
Right. That's the mentality. And I really think one of the important things about the controversy we're in right now, that this event that we're witnessing right now is, I think, a kind of crystallization point for exposing this cultural rift. And I think it is the difference between the culture of life and the culture of death. If your paradigm, if the paradigm through which you see everything is a power dynamic, then you're on the culture of death side of this. That's how I know, right? Is that's the lens through which you see everything.
Yeah.
So, I was going to say that the rest of gender theory is actually bound up with this whole idea, right? Because ultimately, you have to deconstruct the importance of sexual differentiation as such. You have to deconstruct gender. that gender is itself seen as a power variation, right?
Yeah.
It's a power discrepancy. And so you just have to take it away. You wonder, how could it be that we moved from a sort of feminism that championed equal access of women to the goods of society? And like most reasonably conservative men would probably say, yeah, I guess now that you point it out, right? Why can't women play sports? Like, why is it all the sports were dominated by men, by the male players? Women can't play tackle football with men. They'll get crushed. They'll never, they won't even qualify for the team, much less be able to compete on the field without serious injury to themselves. So why don't we just, have sports for women? What's wrong with that? And so we championed that, right, as a society. And we moved from that to the point where now we have biological men competing as women in sports because we've deconstructed gender. We've deconstructed gender, right? So how do we move from that value, from the first value to the second? How do we do that as a culture? And I think what it really shows you, right, is that behind much of feminism from the late 20th century, feminism has many stages, right? But behind much of feminism from the late 20th century to now is something that no longer really can be recognizable as feminism according to any classical understanding. If feminism according to some classical understanding, you would mean that it has something to do with recognizing the distinction between men and women, well, that's no longer what we do, right?
Yeah.
The fourth wave of feminism, which we're in now, is essentially transhumanism.
And that's why you see like the when they're attacking J.K. Rowling.
Or just saying that there really are differences between men and women.
Yeah. She's just an old school feminist, and she's getting canceled by all the trans feminists or whatever because she said, like, wait a second, why are we giving the Woman of the Year award to a dude who's literally only lived his life as a quote unquote as a woman for a year? Like, no. Like, you're telling me, out of all of the women across this planet, that this former dude is our Woman of the Year? Like, and so the old school feminists are just losing it because they see the inconsistencies from, like, wait a second, how did we get from where we started to where we are now? So I find that interesting, where it's starting to turn in on itself to some degree, and fight back against that. But yeah, the kind of the trans the deconstruction, of the human, transhumanism, that the deconstructing of the whole human person, just and that's why, when you look at like, I think maybe you could see, or I could see better now when you say like these are all connected. It all belongs within the realm of destroying the human person, whether it be through abortion or through gender ideology or something like that. They all have the same kind of goal, as to break down the human person into some sort of kind of alien autonomy or something like that.
But you mentioned earlier, right, that you would stop short of calling it diabolical, and the difference between you and me on this is that I wouldn't, right? So I think you probably would too if you, but
I just don't want to say that I think. I don't want people to come away with that comment as saying like everybody that has an abortion is possessed by the devil or is a demon or something like that. Like, I understand that there are women who are put into very tough situations, and because we have created such structures of sin and we've made it very easy to get an abortion, that this becomes predatory and it exploits women who are in very tough situations. right? So I don't want to characterize all of them as diabolical, but I will say the culture as a whole and the people who really are fighting for this
Yeah.
as a sacrament of that is diabolical. I'll go that far.
Yeah. So, you could sort of, you could make a parallel maybe um, between maybe some of the Christians in the early church who
Mhm.
submitted to persecution and handed over the goods of religion to
Sure.
their persecutors, right? And then were later reconciled with the church because in fact they were weak in that moment and they
Mhm.
repented afterwards. You could make a parallel there, right? That
Yeah.
versus the person who advocates for abortion and promotes it and seeks to enshrine it in law and policy.
Yeah.
Um,
Even to
that's
the point where we're
diabolical.
Yeah, even to the point where we're talking about where there's arguments being made for abortion after birth.
Well,
Like,
right. So I was going to say,
just call again, go back to words as power structures, right?
yeah,
They won't use the term that we commonly call, that which is simply murder,
yeah.
like abortion after birth. Like,
But
what
this
is
is
that?
how
That's
you
murder.
know. This is how you know that it is diabolical, right? You know it's
Yeah.
diabolical, and it's not. It's not about like it's not about the things that they say it's about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's not about privacy. It's not about equal protection under the law, because there's no long. It seems to me there's really no longer any interest that you could advocate for once the child has been separated from the mother physically.
Yeah.
If the child is separated from the mother physically, it could be taken into the custody of the state. It become a
Mhm.
ward of the state and be adopted by someone. It does not need to be exposed to the elements in a rock quarry or a cold steel table in a hospital,
Right.
right? The two acts are essentially the same, right? As what we saw in the ancient pagan world when Christians would go and gather up abandoned babies in the
Mhm.
rock quarries, right? Versus, the occasional nurse or hospital orderly who might find a baby left to expire in a storeroom someplace, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not making these stories up. I might have details wrong, but we've all read news stories about this kind of thing.
Yeah. Sure. Sure.
So it's the same thing, and you no longer have an argument to make about your own personal autonomy when that's
Yeah.
the issue. But again, I'm not making this up. This is recent current events, right? This is recent events
Yeah.
in our political landscape. People running for governor in states like Virginia, right? Being asked about this question of leaving a child to die after an attempted abortion, where the baby was nonetheless born alive. And he's like, well, that's a very personal conversation we'll have to have with the doctor and the mother.
Yeah.
Uh, Look,
What?
dude, you're that's culture
Yeah.
death.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's culture
Yeah.
death.
And so the Catholic has to recognize the inconsistencies in this, logically speaking. Finding where no, and don't fall for the word games or the power structure arguments and things like that. Just like call it what it is.
Well, it's evil. It's
Yeah,
diabolical.
it's evil.
And here's the thing, right? I think one of the things that Catholics need to become comfortable with at this point, Catholics,
Mhm.
people on the pro-life side of this, um, is that we we have the moral high ground on this matter,
Mhm.
and I think that you look at companies coming forward and saying like, well, we'll pay for the travel
Oh yeah.
expenses of women who want to go get abortions, or you have celebrities coming out and talking about how it's horrible that this thing is happening and that they had an abortion. It was They're so glad they did. And we're supposed to accept this kind of thing
Hmm.
as if that's morally, you have the moral high ground. They're speaking with the moral authority, and
Yeah.
we should all feel ashamed for our lack of compassion. But when I hear statements like that, to me they sound like somebody, you know, somebody offering to pay for some sort of pro-racial segregation, or pro-slavery kind of. I know it's not a perfect analogy, but
Yeah.
did you have the moral high ground, right, when you were pushing for for racial discrimination?
Yeah.
No, you didn't. And now, if you were to come out and tell everyone what a racist you used to be, right, and how you're unrepentant and you wish everybody could be a racist, you know, you that's not the moral high ground. I mean, you should be
Yeah.
ashamed, and we should say, oh, well, if AT&T is gonna have this person who had an abortion and now advocates for it and celebrates it as one of their
Yeah.
spokespeople in their commercials, then maybe I don't want to do business with AT&T anymore.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you'd think there's always a claim that somebody's got the moral high ground, and it seems to me that it's from the culture of death side that the moral high ground has been claimed consistently for several generations now. And it's time for us to just decide that we don't accept that.
Yeah. I would say a lot of that has to go with the crisis of faith that we've experienced for the past several decades.
Uh-huh.
The same crisis of faith that led to, the sex abuse crisis, the same crisis of faith that led to poor catechesis, bad theology, bad scriptural scholarship, bad liturgical practices. I think all of that stems from a crisis of faith, and now we're asking, for a lot, we're asking spineless Catholics to have a spine. That's a tough place to be. But I think it begins with, like you said, understanding that we do have the moral high ground here, and have faith that we might suffer a little, but at the same time, like we stand on the side of truth and what is right, and I think that goes to one of the elements of a worldview, and that's lifestyle. I mean, who are we going to put, and this is again distinguishing the two cultures one we belong to and the other we're fighting against, right? Who's at the center of that culture, right? For the Christian, God comes first, and our fidelity to Him stands at the highest act, the most noble act that we can do. Whereas the culture of death, that lifestyle is solely centered on the one making the decision, and that's why autonomy seems to be the highest virtue.
Right. That's right.
And so, I mean, I think that's one thing that, again, when we're the Catholic needs to have in the back of their mind, that when we're encountering this culture, ideas like sacrifice, ideas like putting God first, or even others, like that, those are foreign concepts, and some of those are not just foreign concepts, but they're antithetical to that understanding of at the center of my lifestyle is me and my decisions.
Well, so this is why that decision it really cuts right to the heart of the culture war. Not only because it addresses abortion, which is sort of the sacrament of the secularists, but because one of the things it takes aim at is part of the reasoning behind Roe v. Wade in the first place, which is that a way of thinking about liberty, right? So for in the Roe v. Wade decision and repeated in Casey, the idea of liberty is, there's this idea that at the heart of liberty is the ability to define for myself my, what the meaning of life is and what reality is, right? And essentially, basically, this radical kind of autonomy, to define it for myself, and then of course to act accordingly. And they say, no, that's not the way liberty is traditionally understood, at least not in the Constitution of the United States and not in our culture and tradition, but instead ordered liberty, right? The recovery of this idea of ordered liberty, right?
Right.
Which does involve reference to some sort of objective standard of truth. And reaching back further into the tradition, you would say, well, the idea that human beings are not the authors of reality, but something beyond us is the author of reality, right? And that ultimately being responsible means being responsible to the truth of things and to the one who gives us the power to govern our lives.
Yeah, the analogy I always use with this, because I used to be a mechanic, is, we have to, with regards to operating our cars, you have to cooperate with the one who designed it and built it. Yeah. Meaning that I can't say, you know what, gas is really expensive, I'm going to just run my car on water. Guess what? You will break the blasted thing, because it was not designed to run on water. And if you try to run it on anything else, you'll break it and it will be a heap of metal. Yeah. Right. Right. So
you decide, I prefer diesel. Right. Yeah. All right. Go ahead.
Yeah. You're going to break the thing. Or you know what? I'm not going to put oil in it. You're going to break the thing. You have to, there has to be cooperation with the design. Now, if you live in a culture that completely rejects the designer, right? Yeah. You're going to have people, sitting in their broken down cars saying, look at how wonderful my car is, look at how great it is, when in fact it can't do anything. It can't operate because you broke the damn thing.
Yeah, let me give you another analogy. So let me build on your analogy. I'll build on your analogy. You ready? Okay, right. So because this is what I think we're doing, where we do reject the designer, but we can't reject the designer. It's not actually possible to do that.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
So here's the thing. We work with other things that the designer has designed in order to construct technologies for modding the thing that we like ourselves, right? Sure. So you're going to try to mod this contraption that you bought, this machine. Yeah. And you don't like the way it was originally designed, but you don't control you don't control like the laws of physics. So you have to work within the laws of physics or something, right? Yeah. To mod that contraption that you just bought and build it into something it wasn't supposed to be. Yeah. But there are still restrictions. There are tolerances to the various components. And when you try to mod it enough, sooner or later, something's not going to be able to withstand the strain of what you did to it. Sure, you made it do something it wasn't supposed to do. Yeah. Right. Like we could give people hormones to make them appear as a person of a different sex, but there are tolerances, right, to the organism. And if we push beyond them, we're going to do real damage. And I think that where we're at in our culture is, while in the past we tolerated certain aspects of that, now we're having to celebrate them, which is, we would never, you would never have a race, a car show where none of the cars worked, or the convertible section of the car show was nothing but hard tops that just had the top cut off of them, right? No, you're still a hard top. You just cut the top off. That doesn't make it a convertible. It makes it a hard top that you destroyed, right? So it's, not to dwell too much on this analogy, but within all of these things, like you said, there's those parameters that, because of sin, because of this culture of death, and by denying God, we push him out of the picture. We're now accepting things that are just almost at the point of common sense. We're saying, hang on, wait, like, yes, men can get pregnant now.
Like that's the most ridiculous thing. Like we've gone just to the point of being nonsensical. Um, and so, when and this goes from, like you said, rejecting the creator, but at the same time, we can never escape it. And I think that aspect is where Christianity and Christians can genuinely, I think, enter into, I hate to use the word, but dialogue with people, is to draw on those experiences, because you can't escape. You can't escape the design of the human person. You can't escape certain elements that God has built within us, right? And so, what does the culture of death do? Well, we just need to deconstruct everything, right? And so the whole lifestyle within this is rejecting, is an attempt. I'll say that the lifestyle aspect is an attempt to reject the design while still trying to operate within it, right? So you reject that your car runs on gas, but you're still trying to operate your car. That's never going to lead to a fully functioning car. That's not going to. It's just going to lead to a bunch of broken down vehicles on the side of the road, right? So this idea of, again, living this completely self-centered life, even to the point where where some are just simply making the argument that it's okay to kill a child because of convenience.
Yeah.
Right. So by putting yourself at the center, by having the self as the center of this culture, we hold up things like autonomy, and we downplay things like sacrifice. Why should I have no obligation to sacrifice anything for anybody, period.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
Which is distinctly just anti-Christian. And I think
it's incompatible with the faith.
Yeah, and where this leads also, so like a third aspect of these two differing worldviews is eschatology, right? Mm-hmm. We're dealing here with two totally different eschatologies, or how do we see the final end of man? Christians obviously, as the best way I've heard it, is that, in the end, you will either be a tragedy in hell or a glorious triumph in heaven. There's mm-hmm. nothing in the middle. And so that's one worldview. Whereas, the eschatology of the culture of death is, this is all you got. And you're the center of that.
That's right. That's right. You're the center of it. So if you don't make your life the life you want to live now, it's the only chance you get. And so you've lost. Yeah. Right. Whereas from a Christian perspective, right. You kind of, you only have one chance, I guess. I'll admit that you only have one chance to get humanity right.
Sure.
But you don't only have one chance to be satisfied. Right.
Right.
So the idea that, I guess when you look at, are you the center of reality for mm-hmm. the sake of which all else can be sacrificed? Or are you oriented toward something else?
Yeah.
Right. Are you yourself a creature of sacrifice?
Yeah.
For the sake of something that's of ultimate value.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's almost like when you're trying to explain to your children, like, you're on your way to, your child's never been to the zoo, or your child's never been to a theme park or something. You're asking them to wait, to be patient. Mm-hmm. You don't know the fun and all the awesome stuff that's going to come, but be patient. Wait for those things. The long car ride, make a sacrifice of it, right? That's difficult for the small child, and because they have little to no understanding of the reality of a theme park mm-hmm. or the reality of the zoo. In a similar way, the people that live in the culture of death, they have no understanding of the reality of sacrifice, the reality of as Christ says, if you want to receive, you have to give. That sacrifice can lead to happiness, even if it involves suffering. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't follow the logic of the culture of death. And I think that's again just difficult for us to wrap our minds around if we're within this culture that again puts you at the center.
Yeah, well, even if they make a compassion argument and they say, there's the old argument about how like, well, the child's going to grow up in poverty or whatever, and he won't be happy.
Yeah.
And so, what's the merciful response to lack of happiness is killing someone, right? You deserve to die because you're unhappy.
And I get to make that decision.
The punishment for unhappiness is death, right? I mean, it's a very, very strange worldview when you think about it.
And the other thing I'd add to that as well is, and this does go back to Marx, is kind of the view of everything through the economic lens, right? So this person is going to be poor. This child is going to grow up in poverty. That is not okay. That's, I guess, economics is a part of life. So we can look at life through the lens of economics, but can it be reduced to economic? Can the value of life be reduced to only economics?
Well, no, I would reject that thesis. And obviously you would too, but you could also ask a more practical question, which is death the only solution to this problem? Right. I mean, can't we come up with, we can all recognize that there's a problem, right? In abject poverty, there's a problem in fatherless children. There are problems here, but is this the only way to solve them? I think we could do better than this. And I
think we're a little bit more creative.
If we put as much energy into trying to solve that particular problem as we put into trying to figure out, how we can kind of escape biological sex, then I think we might have made some great strides here.
Yeah.
But, what can I tell you? I think ultimately, I don't know how to say it. Tomorrow's Mother's Day, 2022, right? As we record this. And supposedly there will be protests at various Catholic churches with the intent of disrupting the Mass. And the reason for that, I'm told, is that, the Catholic advocacy for the pro-life position is sort of the major cultural threat that lies behind this particular position. This decision in the Supreme Court, that ultimately, if we won a victory, it was because of the Catholics. And you know what? I'll accept that. I mean, let's say that that's, I don't know if it's 100% the whole truth. I don't think it is 100% the whole truth, but it's a part of it for sure, right? There's no question that Catholicism has been the major driving, the Catholic institution, Catholic people have been the major driving force behind the pro-life movement in the United States, right? They were mostly the organizers of the March for Life. And all right, so that's fine. We're not the exclusive actors, but without us, there'd be a lot less power behind that movement. So I'll accept that charge, but I want you to be honest about what you're saying. You want to disrupt the Catholic Mass because you love abortion, because you value abortion, that's your sacrament, so you'll disrupt ours, right? That's what you're saying. And and to go back to this charge of being diabolical, I think it's time to just accept that it is.
And I think for a lot of Catholics, the line in the sand is being clarified. It's being drawn clearly. There's no kind of balancing on the fence if there ever was one. That part is quickly gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's time for, again, the only thing that's going to solve this is fidelity to God, and what He's revealed, and that's going to involve suffering. That's going to involve a lot of things that we don't particularly care for or seek out. But at the same time, as Catholics, we have that worldview, and we have that eschatological view of where it ends. It ends in glory. It ends with being with God in communion in the most full way in heaven. The middle part, though, is a little fuzzy, and that's where we need grace and virtue and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Dr. Bulzacchelli, I think you've given our listeners a lot to think about, and I hope we've given our listeners kind of maybe a little deeper view of what's going on, to not just take it at face value or just simply, look at it from a judicial standpoint, but to see, to look deeper into what's going on, and to position ourselves to fight against it effectively and courageously, because this is where God is, I think, calling Catholics to stand on that side. But it's hard, it's difficult, and so that's why we need the church, we need the sacraments, we need the grace that God gives us. So I want to invite all our listeners. Thanks for listening, and please, like I said, share this content with your friends and family, and check out all of our content over at CatholicStudiesAcademy.com. In the meantime, God bless.